Good morning, and welcome to this week's edition of Keeping an Eye on the Geopolitical Ball with me, Jamie Shea, Senior Fellow at Friends of Europe in Brussels. Above the clamour of all of those celebrating the election of Joe Biden at the weekend, you could hear in Europe an audible sigh of relief that once again a multilateralist is in the White House, and somebody who has a long track record of working with Europe on a host of issues. I remember that Joe Biden was at the forefront of NATO enlargement in the 1990s, calling for a NATO intervention in the Balkans to stop ethnic cleansing. And in the early days of the Trump administration, he was at the Munich Security Conference to cheer us all up and tell us that America, I quote, will be back. Well, now America is back, and Biden has already announced that he intends for the US to return to the Paris climate agreement, return to the World Health Organization, resume the nuclear deal with Iran if the Iranians also, of course, come back into compliance. And he's done things that warm European hearts, like announcing he will lift the travel ban on Muslims entering the United States and treat illegal immigrants in the US in a more humane way. But above all, Europeans will look forward to a much better quality of transatlantic dialogue and working together to find common solutions. I remember being at a NATO summit in July 2018 with President Trump when he came late to the meeting, used his remarks only to castigate the Europeans on burden sharing, then got up and walked out and didn't come back. He was clearly very unhappy and very uncomfortable being with Europeans in a multilateral setting. That's not going to happen with Joe Biden, who clearly is going to remain at the table and engaged throughout. But does that mean that it's all going to be plain sailing from now on? Well, clearly no, because any historian of transatlantic relations will know that it's always been ups and downs, including with democratic administrations. For example, I remember Bill Clinton very hesitant to intervene in Bosnia in the 1990s. I remember President Obama coming late to the game in Libya and declaring that the US would be happy to lead from behind. And no doubt already there are areas where life will not always be comfortable, even with Joe Biden. For example, trade issues. It was quite paradoxical that on the day that Biden was elected, the Europeans slapped 8 billion euros worth of tariffs on the United States following a WTO ruling. And Biden, of course, like Trump, will uphold American jobs and American economic interests. On burden sharing in NATO, he's also likely to be assertive too, because that was a policy that was not initiated by Trump, but in fact by President Obama. What the Europeans can hope for, however, is that Biden will be also more interested in what we get for the money in terms of outputs and more willing to count into the balance all of the many contributions with troops and foreign aid and other things that Europeans make to global security. He's likely to be tough on values, which may not necessarily be good news for Poland, Hungary, or Turkey, where there's been backsliding. Biden knows that the value of NATO is in its democratic principles and its political cohesion. He's not going to see NATO only in transactional terms. One question is, will he maintain not just the Article 5 guarantee to NATO, which Trump put into question, but also military commitments on the ground in places like Poland or Germany? Will he rescind, for example, Trump's recent decision to pull 12,000 US troops out of Germany as well? And finally, he is likely to call for a transatlantic approach vis-a-vis China, which could be uncomfortable for the Europeans. But will the Europeans be able to convince Joe Biden that this is not just pressure on China or sanctions or containment, but also should have an area of cooperation and working on common interests like climate change as well? So how should Europe react to the news that Joe Biden will soon be in the White House? Well, first of all, to recognize that Biden will give more, but also want more in exchange. If the Europeans are going to be true partners, they have to step up to the plate. Number two, the Europeans should not wait for the inauguration in January before they reach out to the Biden transition team and put their own ideas and proposals on the table, as the German foreign minister has usefully suggested. Number three, they should seize the current opportunity of the review of NATO's future to have a NATO summit with Biden soon, to launch a new strategic concept where NATO's remit can be expanded to cover issues which are dear to the Biden administration, such as China, such as a European-Asian dialogue, and focusing NATO more on resilience issues, dealing with shocks like COVID as well. But in conclusion, there are three things that the Europeans need to bear in mind. Number one, Biden was not elected to fix world government, but America's domestic problems, particularly racial divisions, the impact of the virus, and the faltering economy. Number two, he will not stop the pivot to Asia, which was initiated under Barack Obama. And number three, Europe will never be able to forget that Trump achieved nearly 71 million votes, the second largest tally in history. Trump and Trumpism have not gone away. And at the back of Europe's mind will always be the prospect that in 4 years' time, populist nationalism could return to the United States with all of the unpredictabilities. So this is not the time for Europe to give up its quest for strategic autonomy and to have greater self-reliance in an uncertain world. But Biden does mean that that strategic autonomy can be described as being a counterpart to the United States and no longer a counterweight to the United States. And in my mind, that takes us a giant step forward. Thank you very much for following, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.